Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. In this video we have a tutorial, knitting tutorial this time. So I hope you are excited. My name is Catalina and I'm the person behind by Catalina Designs, and today I will show you how I made this loose knitting sweater. This sweater was kind of an experiment. I just tried to use bigger needles with thinner yarn and see what will be the result. So I wasn't so confident about that it will work. That's why I started to work on this sweater I think last year and just finished it this year because I was like, yeah, I don't know how it's looking, I don't know how it will be, but in the end I was super proud about it, and I posted here on YouTube and on other social media platforms, and it looks like you like it too, and some people ask for the tutorial. So I want to tell you that it won't be a written pattern as well. I will try to explain the construction and make it easier for you to adjust it to any size that you want. So I will explain all the steps, how to calculate the number of stitches to start with for your specific size, and I hope it will be really helpful for you if you want to try and make this sweater to be able to do it in any size. And with these explanations that I will give you, it won't necessarily be to use thinner yarn and bigger needles. You can adjust the needles and the yarn as you prefer. So I really hope that you'll enjoy this tutorial. So let's get started. So first of all, what you will need for this sweater, as I said, I will give you the information of the materials that I used, but you can adjust this and work with any type of yarn you would like and use any needles. So I use finger in sock yarn. This is called Footprints from Wool Addicts, and I use 8mm needles. So I started to work this bottom up, and I worked in circular rounds up to the armpit. So I used I think 80 centimeters cord needles. You can use up to I don't know, 100, but I find it easier to slide the stitches, the loops, the stitches, if they are close to each other than if I'm using a bigger wire for my circular needles. Then after we got to the desired length up to the armpit, and this is where you can adjust the length, then we will split the number of stitches in half, dividing the back panel and the front panel to work across the armhole. And right now I think I started with the front panel first, so I divided the number of stitches in half, and you'll keep all the stitches on your needle, so you don't need to put them on hold. But of course, that if you find it easier to put them on a cable while you're working on a section of the sweater, you can do it. So I split it in half, and I worked a few rows to get to the desired width of the armhole, so the desired length. And for the front panel, then I split it for the shoulders, because I also did a few decreases up here. I started with one side and work, of course, the number of stitches, measuring the neckline that I wish to have, and then starting to decrease, and in the end finishing and let the stitches on the needle. If you want, you can because I was working an even number of rows, so my needle was pointing to that side. So to point to this side to be able to continue with the other shoulder, I just slip all the stitches on the needle to have them, you'll see. Then I started to bind off the stitches in the middle that I had, and then started to work on the other shoulder, the same with the decreasing at the neckline. In the end, I got again with my needle over here, so I needed to slip all the stitches because I needed to start the back panel, to work the back panel and to position the needle in that way so you can continue working with the back panel. This is because I wanted to keep it easier for me. I find it easier this way to use only one pair of needles, but of course, again, you can put them on hold, and you'll have to put on hold the stitches for the shoulders as well, because I use the crochet hook to join the shoulders, the back and the front. But of course, again, you can bind off and stitch them together afterwards after finishing the back. And then I started to work with the back, working the number of rows the same as you had here for the front across the armhole, and then joining the shoulders with a crochet hook. Then I picked up the stitches in the round for the sleeves, worked the sleeve with smaller cable needles, so I used the 40 centimeters needles, but of course there are plenty of methods. You can use the loop method, you can use the double pointed needles, or you can use the traveling loop method. So anything that it's easier, and of course according to the supplies that you have, you will need to work the sleeve in the round. And of course keeping the same thing with this one. And then I picked up the stitches at the neckline using the same 40 centimeters needles to make the ribbing at the collar. So this is kind of it about the construction of the sweater. It is super light. I will put all the details into the description below, to the materials, how much you will need, and so on. So now let's start and work the sweater. Okay, before starting to cast on, I do recommend to make a gauge swatch and to wet it and block it, meaning that you will pin it on a board, and this will give you a more accurate stitch count, and you'll be able to measure it, see how many stitches do you have in 10 centimeters, and then to calculate with how many stitches you will need to start according to the desired circumference of the sweater. Now for my size, I cast on 120 stitches, and my sweater measures, after blocking, 94 centimeters in circumference, and my bust measures 88 centimeters. After I cast on the stitches, I'm starting the first ribbing round, so I'm not joining right after casting on. I do prefer to work the first round and then to join. I find it easier this way. So for the bottom ribbing, I'm using a 1-to-1 ribbing, meaning I'm knitting 1 and purl 1. I do have a modified type of purling. This is my way of doing it, but of course you just need to purl. So after I finish the first row, I pay attention not to twist the stitches. This is very, very important. And then use a stitch marker to mark the beginning of the round. And then we are continuing to knit 1, purl 1. Here where the join will be, it will be a bit of a gap, but don't worry, we will fix that when we will weave in the end at the beginning. So this is my modified purling method, but of course you need to simply purl the stitches. I'm just doing it this way, not to twist the stitches because of my way of purling. If you prefer for the ribbing, for the bottom hem ribbing, you can use smaller needles. This will give you tighter loops. So this will be the gap, but don't worry, we will close it when weaving in the end. And now I'm continuing to work this ribbing, 1-to-1 ribbing. I worked in total 8 rows for the ribbing, but of course you can work as many rows as you want, depending on how thick you want the ribbing to be. Now, after finishing the ribbing, this is how it's looking. And now we will simply start to knit. Again, my purl stitches I knit the purl stitches in the back. Again, not to twist the stitches, just because of my way of purling the stitches. But you need to do it in your way. You don't have to do it as I am doing it. So now just knit the entire round, and we are starting to work the trunk of our sweater, the length up to the armpit, and we will knit in the round for as many rows as you wish until you get to the desired length. So I finished the first row, and now we will simply knit in the round. I worked in total 56 rounds in knitting up to the armpit. You can work as many rounds as you wish, and this section of the trunk was measuring 38 centimeters with the 1-to-1 ribbing, so with the ribbing, including the ribbing. So depending on the desired length, you should work as many rows as you wish. Because I had 2 colorways of the same yarn and only 1 ball of each, and I didn't know if it will be enough to complete the sweater. After working the ribbing, I decided to alternate one round with one color, one round with the other. Of course, after getting to the armpit, I just continued with one color. It wasn't such a big difference because it's still variegated yarn, but I said at the beginning to use it as it is and alternate one round with one color and one without. With the other color. So this is how it's looking after working a few rounds of the trunk. I finished a number of rounds up to the armpit, and now what we will do, we will split the total number of stitches into half, dividing the number of stitches for back and for the front panel. And now I will work, I have the stitch marker, so I will knit 60 stitches. After finishing the 60 stitches, I will turn, so I will keep the other stitches for the back. I will keep them on the needle. You can place a stitch marker here at the end of the front just to make sure that you won't work by mistake more stitches, more loops. And now I will start to purl. So now we will be working flat these sections, and I will purl, and of course now you will consider the armhole depth depending on how deep you want the armhole to be, or how wide you want your sleeve to be. So according to that, you will calculate. You can do it, calculate according with your gauge how many rows you will need to work for the armhole. I worked in total 26 rows for the armhole, and for the front panel the last 10 rows will be with some decreasing, splitting into the left shoulder and right shoulder so we can shape the neckline. But let's work the first 16 rows. And after working the first 16 rows, we will then shape the neckline and work on the left and the right shoulder. Okay, so now I will work the left shoulder, and you will use another stitch marker to mark the shoulder stitches. I decided to have 23 stitches for the shoulder. I will decrease with 5 stitches, so I will end up having 18 stitches. And now I will knit until I will have 4 stitches left, because I want to use make the decrease and then to use 2 stitches as selvage to make a nice looking neckline. If you want your neckline to be wider, mine, I realized that it's a bit, it's fitting my head, but it's not that loose around my neck. If you want to be wider, then you can start with less stitches or calculate from the beginning which you would like to be the width of your neckline. So when we have 4 stitches left, we knit 2 together and then knit the other 2. And now we will place the stitch marker, knowing that this is where the first shoulder is finishing. And we will decrease at the end of the row for the left shoulder, and only on the right side row, so only on the knitting row. So now that I turn, I just simply purl all the stitches. Now we are on the right side row again, so we will knit all the stitches until we have 4 stitches left. Because I told you that I alternate the colorways, on this section while I was working flat, I continue to alternate the colors at every 2 rows, so just to start from the same side. So now we will knit all the stitches until we will have 4 stitches left. Then we will knit 2 stitches together. And then we will knit the last 2 stitches. Now turn and purl, and we will continue to repeat these 2 stitches for the remaining 10 rows. So we work first for the front panel, we work 16 rows, and then we will work 10 more rows only for the shoulder, for the left shoulder. If you want to decrease more and you think that you want to decrease more for the neckline, and you didn't realize it at the beginning when splitting the shoulder stitches, you can repeat it even more, so you will decrease a bit more. So now what I will be doing, I will continue to decrease at the end of the row only on the knitted row. So now I finished and working the 10 rows. I will work 2 more rows now without making any decrease, so 12 rows in total. If you want to decrease on these 2 rows again, so on this row that you are working right now in knitting, you can do it to just have a bit more wider neckline. And now we will purl. And we will purl to the end of the row. Now I can cut the yarn because I finished this this shoulder. And now you will have 2 options because we need the needle to point into the other side, so we will be able to work the right shoulder. And you have 2 options here. Either you're knitting 1 more row to just go and to be able to have the needle pointed into that direction, or you can simply slide the stitches into the other needle, so your needle here at the neckline to be empty. You need those stitches to go away from there so you can work on the other stitches. So either you can knit, but now I realize it, and I cut the yarn already, so I will simply slide those stitches from my left needle to my right needle, so I can have this needle empty and I can continue working with the other stitches for the right shoulder. Okay, now I have the stitches here, and the first thing that we will need to do before starting to work on the shoulder, we need to bind off the stitches into the middle. Remember that I said that we have 23 stitches for each shoulder to start with, which means that into the middle 23 with 23 is 46. We have 60 stitches in total, so we will need to bind off 14 stitches. I will use the crochet hook to do that because for me it's easier this way, but of course that you can use any method of binding off. And also, if you prefer to keep the stitches for the neckline, for the elastic at the neckline, the ribbing, and not to pick them up again, because we will do that when working the elastic, then maybe you can put them on hold and just pick them up when you are working the neckline. I will just binding them off with the crochet hook. This is my favorite method to do it. I find it easier. I am in the end a crocheter, so it's easier for me to do it like this. And because I am a crocheter always, I have a crochet on hand, so it's perfect for me. So to make the binding off with the crochet hook, let me zoom in a little bit. I simply go with the crochet hook as I will knitting, and then pass the loop through the loop that I already have on my hook. Like so. Okay, so we will continue to bind off all the stitches. I hope that I calculated correctly. So I have 23 for one shoulder, 23 for the other shoulder. This will sum up as 46 stitches. And if I'm subtracting from the 60 stitches that I have in total, it will remain 14 stitches into the middle to bind off. Okay, now we don't want to remain with one extra loop. So either you're putting it on the needle and then work and knit those stitches two together, or let it like this. It won't count that much, but I will knit them together. So now we will decrease at the beginning of the row. So knit the first 2 stitches and then knit 2 together. If you want your stitches to lay nicely, now I will knit them in the front, not in the back. And then knit the rest of the stitches to the end of the row. So I knit them in the front, the 2 stitches together, because of my modified type of purling, I need to knit the stitches into the back loop, not to have them twisted. If you're purling normally and you knit your stitches in the front, then for this side it will be better to knit the 2 stitches together into the back loop to have them slide nicely, to look nice, the decrease. Now we will purl and we will continue the same, only that we will work the same pattern as for the other shoulder. So 10 rows decreasing at the beginning of the row this time, having those first 2 stitches before the decrease, and we will do it for 10 rows, and then the next 2 rows we will work them without any decrease. And if you want a wider neckline and you didn't, you let 23 stitches as I did, but you want a wider neckline, then you can continue and decrease a bit more. So let's work the shoulder. I won't keep you here to while I'm working on it, because it's the same pattern as the left shoulder. The only difference is that we're doing the decreases at the beginning of the row. Okay, this is how it's looking after we finish both shoulders. Where we join the yarn here when starting to biting off, it will be like a small gap, but when we will pick up the stitches for the collar, we will try to close that, or when weaving in the end. For this shoulder, I will do the same thing. I will slide all the needles, all the stitches on my right needle, because I need my left needle to be empty and right at the beginning of the back panel, because we will start to work the back panel now. If you put the back panel stitches on hold when starting to work on the front panel, then you will have to pick those stitches and have them on your needle. And we will be working the back panel flat, so we will knit and purl. And we will work in total the same number of rows as we worked for the front panel. So for the front panel, we had first 16 rows, then 10 rows with decreasing and 2 more rows. This means that for the back panel, we will need to work 28 rows. Because after finishing with the shoulder, we cut the yarn. Now we will need to rejoin the yarn when start working on the back panel. Because I'm using 2 different colorways, I will alternate the color at every 2 rows. So only when starting the right side row, the knitting row, I will change the color and carry on the yarn on the side of the rows. Okay, so after I finish the first knitting row, then I will turn and purl. And we will keep knit and purl until we will have 28 rows in total. Okay, I finished with the back panel, and now what we need to do is to join the shoulders back panel with the front panel, and I will do it the same with the crochet hook. It's important to have both needles into the same direction. So now, because I'm doing this right shoulder, I need the needles to point to the right. I'll go into the underneath needle and pick up the first loop, then going into the back needle, picking up the loop and pass it through the loop that I already have on my hook, then going into the front needle, picking up the loop and passing through the loop that I already have on my hook, and then we will alternate front needle, back needle, front needle, back needle until we will finish with the stitches that we have on the shoulder, because we will still have the middle stitches on the back panel. So I'm using this method with the crochet hook. I'm using an 8mm crochet hook, so same size as the needles that I'm using. And try to keep those loops looser, because we don't want that seaming on the shoulder to be too tight. And we will work nicely, and our ending point will be when finishing the front panel stitches. But if you want, you can count the stitches on the back panel as well, to make sure that you have the same number of stitches for the back that you are joining as for the front. So now I finish with this with the shoulder and did the other one as well. So this is how it's looking right now. The other shoulder you'll do it into the same manner, so it's the same thing. You need to have those stitches pointed on the right, to the right. And what I did with the stitches left on the back panel, I just put them on the circular needles, the smaller one, because I want to use those stitches when working the collar, so the ribbing for the collar. So I didn't want it to bite them off, because then I needed to pick them up. So when I finished with the first right shoulder, I took the other needles and put those stitches from the back on the needles. This means that and when I got to the left shoulder, I did the same thing and joining with the crochet method. And now what I'm doing, I will pick up the rest of the stitches from the front. So here I'm picking up the stitches from the side rows, are those decreases that we did. And I'm going and pick one stitch into the first 3 rows, so going with the needle into the side row, and then I will skip one. Because in knitting, the number of stitches won't be equal with the number of rows. The rows are a bit shorter. Okay, so we are picking up the stitches all around. Here is where we started to bind off those stitches from the middle of the front panel. So, and I will pick up one stitch. I will go through both just to join and close that gap. And now we need to look at the stitches, how they are laying, and make sure that you're going into that loop. You will see that it's exactly looking as a loop and not into the V. I hope you can see it here. So this is the loop. You see that it's a closing V and then like a loop. So not into the closing V, but into the loop. And we're now picking all the stitches for the collar. And because we are here and we didn't want to keep those stitches at the back on the needle, we will start working the ribbing for the collar. As I said, I'm using 40 centimeters needle, so this is the length of the needle with the cable including, so needles plus cable. You can also use double pointed needles, or you can use the traveling loop method, or different types of methods when you're working in the round, but you have a small circle. It's not like working a big piece. It will be the same on the sleeves. We will need those smaller needles or double pointed needles or a different method to work in the round. When you're going to pick up the stitches from the side rows on those decreases that you did, make sure that you keep a straight line. This was one of my first mistakes as I did when I started to work on this picking up the stitches from the side rows, that I was not keeping a straight line. I know it might sound weird if you're a beginner, but at some point you will get used to it, and it will be easier for you to understand what I mean. Now I will try to keep nice here and go with picking up the stitches and try to close all the holes that might be from the joining and so on. And when I picked all the stitches, we will simply start to work 1-to-1 ribbing. So one knit and purl, knit and purl, knit and purl, and of course that you will work this collar as wider or as thick as you wish. I will place a stitch marker just to know where the beginning of the round starts, and we will work a 1-to-1 ribbing. I think I worked in total 6 rounds, but of course that you can work more or less depending on your preferences. Okay, so this is how it's looking. By the way, you will need an even number of stitches around the neckline when working the 1-to-1 ribbing. If at some point at the end of the row you realize that you have more stitches, so you will need to only purl the last stitch but you have one more, then purl all those 2 stitches together. And after finishing with the ribbing, we will meet up again to bind off all those stitches. I am using the same crochet method for binding off because it's how I prefer it. I used a smaller hook to bind off the neckline, but I think it wasn't a good idea, and that is why my neckline is not that stretchy with the binding off. So I do recommend, because I was using I think a 6.5 millimeter, but I do recommend to use the same 8 millimeter crochet hook, because in this way your binding off will be stretchy and you won't have issues to dress the pullover. I don't have a bigger problem with that because it still fits, as I said, but I would prefer it to slide more easier on my head. So don't use a smaller crochet hook unless you realize that your collar is wider and maybe you really need to be narrower. So in this way you can use a smaller crochet hook. So with the crochet method is the same as I bind it off before. I will work the stitches as they are, knit or purl, and that loop resulted, I will pass it through the loop on my hook. Then I will finish like this with a chain and cut the yarn. Okay, so this sweater is looking really wrinkly right now. This is how the collar is looking, and now we need to move towards the sleeves. When we will pick up the stitches from the side edge of the armhole, we will proceed the same as we did on the collar. So you will go and pick up 3 stitches from 3 side rows and then skip the next side row, and you will continue like that until you will pick up all the stitches around. And then we will place a stitch marker to mark the beginning of the row, and we will start to knit all the stitches because we will knit in the round. So only knitting until you're getting with your sleeve at the desired length. I worked in total 60 rows for the sleeve length, and for the last row before the ribbing, the cuff ribbing, I did some decreases, and I will show it to you right away. So my arms are actually smaller so you might need more rows. Again, to calculate the number of rows that you need for your sleeve length, it's easier to go to your gauge swatch, measure how many rows you have in 10 centimeters, then measure how long do you want your sleeve to be, and transform those centimeters into rows, and work the number of rows resulted, and you will be fine with it. Also, this sweater can because we finished the trunk, we finished everything, and the sleeves are worked top down, so you can try it on and see how many rows you will need to work for the sleeve. Okay, I finished 60 rows. Well, I'm about to finish the last row. And then, as I said before, start working the one-to-one cuff ribbing. We will do some decreases. So I will decrease like working one knit and then knit two together, knit one, knit two together, until we will get to the end of the row of the round. Of course, if you're not having a multiple of 3 stitches, you won't get with the last 2 stitches to be the knit together, but it doesn't matter. Keep repeating the same pattern until you will finish the row. Now, having less stitches, it's kind of starting to be a bit difficult to work, but I'm trying to use also the traveling loop and to pull out the cord of my needles to make it shorter. And we will start to knit 1 purl 1 for the cuff ribbings. And I worked in total 8 rows, the same number of rows as I did it on the bottom hem. And the same as I said on the collar, if at the end of the first row you have to purl the last stitch but you have 2 stitches left, then purl them together to make sure that you're having an even number of stitches so that the one-to-one ribbing to work. And we will continue to work the 8 rows as I said, but of course if you want a wider cuff, then you can work more. Okay, after finishing with the cuff ribbing, we will use again the crochet hook to bind off those stitches. This time again I'm using a smaller hook size. It's 6.5 millimeter, but this time I don't mind because if the cuff is tighter, it's actually better, not worse, unless you of course you decrease too many stitches and now it's already too tight. So I will be doing the same, so work the stitches as they are, as a purl or as a knit, only that I'm using the crochet hook instead of the needle. which will make it a bit difficult to get through the stitches. And then I'm passing the loop through the loop that I already have on my hook. Of course, as the same as I said, you can use a different binding method if you want, but this is really handy for me. So after we finish with this cuff, because I already wore the other sleeve, but if you're at the first one, you will need to repeat the same pattern for the other sleeve. And after finishing everything, you will need to weave in all the ends. And then this particular fiber is cotton with wool, and I wash it on a delicate program. But I do recommend, because of if you're not sure and you didn't do that before with your washing machine, because of these loose loops, they might shrink or get, I don't know, pull out the strings out of the stitches. So better to do it by hand. So hand wash is perfect for this project. So this is how it's looking before blocking. It wasn't that nice, and I wasn't that happy with it, with all those uneven tension. But after blocking, it was actually looking pretty nice, and yeah, and I loved it. So this was it with this tutorial. So I hope you liked this tutorial. I have to say that I'm not an experienced knitter. I do like to knit, and I'm doing it in between my crochet projects. So this is not like a tutorial coming from an expert. This is how I saw the things that can be done, but of course that might be some different methods to do it, and I'm sure that an experienced knitter that worked to so many projects until now knows how to do it better. But you asked for it, and I just showed you how I made the sweater. I hope that this was helpful for you. I hope you would like to do it. I hope it inspires you to try different textures with thinner yarn, bigger needles, and to end up with a project that you would like to wear. So thank you so much for being here with me for another tutorial, and see you next time. Bye!